Welcome to this deep dive where we're going to explore some dark territory. Alcatraz in the 1930s.
Like,
Your sources for this deep dive focus on the film Murder in the First. And let me tell you, this isn't just some Hollywood thriller. It's based on a true story that throws some really tough questions at us about justice, punishment, and what happens when those two things collide. So imagine this. A young man named Henri Young
like,
steals $5 to feed his starving sister. A desperate act, sure, but one that lands him in the most notorious prison in America,
wow.
Alcatraz, a place designed to be inescapable.
What's fascinating is that Alcatraz wasn't just about keeping prisoners locked up. It was about breaking them.
Breaking them.
Yeah, everything about the place,
Mm-hmm.
from the isolation to the constant surveillance,
Yeah.
created an atmosphere of absolute control where even the toughest criminals were supposed to crumble.
It almost sounds like psychological warfare, not just imprisonment.
Exactly. And it's in this pressure cooker environment that Young's story unfolds.
Mhm.
His attempt to escape lands him in solitary confinement for 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. Now, solitary back then wasn't like
Oh.
anything you see in prisons today. We're talking about complete sensory deprivation.
Well,
Also, no human contact, just darkness and the echoing silence of a concrete tomb.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. The film really dives into the psychological effects of this kind of isolation, doesn't it?
It does. Studies on sensory deprivation show that prolonged isolation can trigger extreme anxiety, hallucinations, even full-blown psychosis. You literally lose your grip on reality.
So Young goes into solitary desperate and comes out. How would you even describe it?
Shattered. The man who emerges, he's a shell of his former self, consumed by rage and deeply traumatized. This tragically leads him to kill a fellow inmate.
And that's where James Stamphill enters the picture. This young, idealistic lawyer gets assigned to Young's case. You can almost imagine his initial reaction. How am I supposed to defend this guy? But as he digs deeper, he uncovers the horrifying truth about what Young endured.
What's brilliant about the film is that it doesn't just focus on Young's guilt or innocence. Stamphill turns the entire trial into an indictment of Alcatraz itself.
Wow.
He puts the prison system on trial,
Correct.
exposing its brutality to the world.
That's where things get really interesting. Stamphill doesn't just present facts and legal arguments. He uses witness testimonies to paint a vivid, horrifying picture of what life on Alcatraz was truly like.
And those testimonies are brutal. Former inmates describe graphic details of physical abuse, psychological manipulation, and a constant atmosphere of fear and despair. Suddenly, the nation is forced to confront the reality of this infamous prison.
This trial really was a turning point, wasn't it? It wasn't just a legal battle. It became a public reckoning with the dark side of the American justice system.
Absolutely. The trial exposed a fundamental question that we still grapple with today. What is the purpose of prison? Is it simply to punish? Or is it to rehabilitate? And how do we balance the need for justice with the basic human rights of those in our custody?
Those are questions that Murder in the First throws at us with full force. But before we get too deep into that debate, let's rewind a bit and talk about the man at the center of this storm, Henri Young. Who was he before Alcatraz?
That's what makes his story so tragic. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a young man who made a desperate choice to help his family. And it's that act of desperation that sends him spiraling into this nightmare.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? A small transgression leading to this epic downfall. Alcatraz becomes both his physical prison and a metaphor for the ways in which our choices can trap us.
Exactly. And the film uses that metaphor brilliantly. Visually representing Alcatraz is this inescapable force, shrouded in mist and surrounded by treacherous waters. It's an image that stays with you long after the film ends.
It does. Now, we've talked about Young in the trial, but what about his lawyer, Stamphill? What kind of man takes on a case like this? Especially in a time when public opinion was so strongly against anyone who dared to challenge the system.
Stamphill is a fascinating character, almost an archetype, of the idealistic young lawyer who believes in fighting for justice no matter the cost. But what's interesting is that the film doesn't shy away from showing his flaws, his moments of doubt and uncertainty. He's not some superhero lawyer. He's a human being wrestling with a deeply complex situation.
And his relationship with Young adds another layer of complexity to the film. There's this push and pull between them, this struggle to understand each other, that really gets to the heart of the film's ethical questions.
You said it. On the surface, it's a story about a prison break and a murder trial. But underneath, it's about something much deeper. It's about human dignity, the consequences of our choices, and the enduring struggle for justice in a flawed system.
And it's a story that continues to resonate with us today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Because while Alcatraz may be closed, the questions it raises about our justice system, about our responsibility to those in our care, are as relevant now as they were in the 1930s. Host, his seemingly minor offense, landed him in a place deliberately designed to break even the strongest spirits.
Right.
Alcatraz wasn't always this infamous symbol of brutality. It actually began as a military fort in the mid-1800s.
Oh, wow.
But its isolation and unforgiving environment made it the ideal location for a maximum security prison.
So almost from the beginning, it had this aura of being inescapable, a place where hope goes to die.
Exactly. And when it officially became a federal penitentiary in 1934, it was reserved for the worst of the worst, inmates deemed too dangerous or escape-prone for any other facility.
The government really leaned into that reputation too, didn't they?
Yeah. They wanted Alcatraz to be this psychological weapon, not just a physical prison.
Absolutely.
Inmates were stripped of their identities, reduced to numbers. Every aspect of their lives was controlled. Constant surveillance, rigid routines, even basic privileges were manipulated to enforce obedience.
It sounds incredibly dehumanizing. You can almost feel the weight of that system bearing down on you, crushing any sense of individuality or hope.
That was the point. And to make matters worse, solitary confinement was used liberally. Remember what we discussed about the psychological effects of prolonged isolation? It's torture. Plain and simple.
And you can see the devastating impact of that on Henri Young in the film. It's a slow, agonizing descent into madness.
It is. The real Henri Young, like his on-screen counterpart, was driven to a breaking point by the brutality of Alcatraz. It raises a crucial question about the purpose of punishment. Are we trying to rehabilitate individuals or simply break them?
And that question hung over the entire trial, didn't it?
Yeah. It wasn't just about Young's guilt. It was about exposing the system that created the conditions for his crime.
So the very system designed to contain the worst of the worst.
Precisely. The trial brought to light this simmering debate within the prison system itself. Even some officials recognized that Alcatraz's methods were excessively harsh, that the relentless punishment was counterproductive.
Might have actually been making them worse. That's a chilling thought.
It is. But Murder in the First doesn't offer simple answers. It presents a nuanced view of the prison system, acknowledging the challenges faced by those working within it, while also exposing the inherent brutality of the institution itself.
The film forces us to acknowledge the human cost of these systems, doesn't it?
Behind the policies, the regulations, the cold, hard walls, there are real people whose lives are being profoundly affected.
That's the power of this story. It humanizes those often dehumanized by the justice system, and that's something we need to be constantly mindful of, even today.
Absolutely. The story of Alcatraz serves as a stark warning. It reminds us that even well-intentioned systems can become instruments of oppression if we aren't vigilant, if we don't prioritize human dignity.
And that brings us back to the broader implications of Murder in the First. While Alcatraz may be closed, the issues it raises, mass incarceration, racial disparities, the ethics of punishment versus rehabilitation, these are all challenges we still face today.
That's like the ghost of Alcatraz still haunts our justice system, a constant reminder of the potential for cruelty and injustice if we lose sight of our core values.
Exactly. And that's why stories like this are so important. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths, to examine our own biases, and to consider how we can create a more just and compassionate society.
And Murder in the First, for all its darkness, also offers a glimmer of hope, doesn't it?
Yes. It shows that even in the face of overwhelming odds, individuals can make a difference. Think about Stamphill, a young lawyer taking on the seemingly insurmountable power of the federal government. He might not have achieved a complete victory, but his unwavering commitment to his client, his willingness to challenge the system, sparked a national conversation and ultimately contributed to reforms within the prison system. It's a reminder that even within a flawed system, there's always room for progress. And that's a powerful message, especially in times when things might seem bleak.
Absolutely. Murder in the First reminds us that we all have a role to play in creating a more just world, whether it's advocating for reform, supporting organizations that work with incarcerated individuals, or simply educating ourselves about the complexities of the justice system. We can all make a difference.
And speaking of making a difference, let's talk about the film itself as a piece of storytelling. How does Murder in the First manage to be both entertaining and thought-provoking?
It's a testament to the power of storytelling. Murder in the First isn't a documentary. It takes creative liberties with the historical record. To craft a compelling narrative, it uses the factual events as a foundation, but weaves in fictional elements to heighten the drama and emotional impact.
And in doing so, it taps into something universal, doesn't it?
Yeah. The themes of injustice, the struggle against a corrupt system, the fight for human dignity, these resonate with audiences, regardless of the historical context.
You're absolutely right. And that's what makes the film so powerful. It uses this specific story, this one man's tragic journey, to explore larger truths about human nature and the consequences of our choices as a society. It's a reminder that stories have the power to move us, to challenge our perspectives, and to inspire us to act. And it's not just the story itself, is it?
Yeah. The film is beautifully crafted, using visuals and sound to create this oppressive atmosphere that mirrors the reality of Alcatraz.
Think about the constant fog.
Yes, that envelops the island. The cold, gray concrete walls, the clanging metal doors, it all contributes to this feeling of claustrophobia and despair, reflecting the psychological impact of imprisonment.
It's almost like the prison itself becomes a character in the film, a menacing presence that looms over everything.
And that's part of the film's genius. It uses cinematic techniques to create a visceral experience for the viewer, allowing us to feel the weight of the story, the despair, and the struggle for hope that unfolds within those prison walls.
It's not just a film you watch, it's a film you experience. And that makes the message, the ethical questions it raises, all the more impactful.
Exactly. It's a powerful example of how storytelling can be used to not only entertain, but also to inform and inspire, to spark conversations, and to challenge us to think critically about the world around us.
Now let's delve into something that really struck me. The use of Alcatraz as a symbol. It represents more than just a physical prison, doesn't it? It feels like Alcatraz becomes this representation of any system that can crush the human spirit, whether it's an actual prison or something more metaphorical.
That's a brilliant use of symbolism, those cold, gray concrete walls, the ever-present fog, the isolation of the island itself. They all work together to create this sense of inescapable oppression. It's a visual reminder of the ways in which systems can dehumanize and control individuals.
And you see that reflected in Young's journey. He goes into Alcatraz as this desperate but still hopeful young man, and the system just grinds him down piece by piece.
The film visually reinforces that descent. As Young endures solitary confinement and abuse, we see him becoming more and more withdrawn, his eyes losing their spark. The filmmakers use close-ups to show the toll it takes on him, the way his spirit is slowly breaking.
So Alcatraz becomes this symbol of the ways in which our environments, both physical and systemic, can shape us, sometimes for the worse. It makes you think about the systems we create in society, the laws we enact, even the power structures within families or workplaces. They can all become prisons in their own way, can't they?
Absolutely. And that's one of those powerful takeaways from Murder in the First. It encourages us to look beyond the literal prison walls and consider the ways in which we might be complicit in creating or perpetuating systems that limit human potential and perpetuate suffering.
It's a sobering thought. If Alcatraz represents these larger systems of oppression, what does that mean for us? How do we break down those metaphorical walls?
It starts with awareness. We need to recognize those systems, understand how they operate, and acknowledge the ways in which they impact individuals and communities. Once we see those systems clearly, we can start to dismantle them.
And dismantling them means more than just changing laws or policies, right?
Well, it's about shifting our mindset, challenging our own biases, and being willing to speak up against injustice wherever we see it.
It's about creating a culture that values compassion, empathy, and restorative justice over punishment and retribution.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, regardless of their past mistakes.
Murder in the First, while set in the past, throws a powerful spotlight on these very contemporary issues, doesn't it?
It does. It reminds us that the fight for justice is ongoing, and it requires constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge the status quo, even though Alcatraz is closed. The questions it raises about our responsibility to those who are incarcerated, the need for humane treatment, and the importance of rehabilitation are more relevant than ever.
Well said. And maybe that's the ultimate power of stories like this. They remind us that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world. It might seem overwhelming, but even small acts of kindness, awareness, And advocacy can make a difference.
I completely agree. And who knows, maybe someone listening to this deep dive will be inspired to take action, to challenge a system, to speak up for someone who doesn't have a voice.
That would be incredible. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our exploration of Murder in the First. We've unpacked the plot, dug into the historical context, and wrestled with the tough ethical questions it raises.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope it's left you with more than just information. I hope it sparked a sense of curiosity, a desire to learn more, and maybe even a little bit of hope.
Me too. Because ultimately, that's what the best stories do. They stay with us, they make us think, and they inspire us to create a better world.
Beautifully put. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the stories that matter.
Until next time.